Hi, Carolyn. How are you?
Hi, Laurie. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Great. Thanks for coming on today for the Artfest online chat. And with Carolyn Barnett from Carolyn Barnett Knit Design. Is it Knit Designs, right? Knit.
It's Carolyn M. Barnett Designs because I do more than knitting, but knits is what I mostly do.
Yeah, Caroline's from Kingston, and of course, this is where we're supposed to be this weekend. So, or not this weekend, but yeah, I guess this weekend coming up.
Yeah, this weekend. Yeah, Canada Day weekend.
That's Canada Day weekend. So, Caroline, you've had an amazing art career, so diverse. I mean, I don't even know where to start with you. I mean, it's been so exciting, you know. Well, stuff. First of all, your product is just absolutely beautiful with all the knit clothing and the jackets and the scarves and all the other things that you've done. So, I mean, you actually basically make your fabric too, though. Like, what is it you do with your fabric?
Well, I knit on a knitting machine. Now that was my primary. I do other things too. You know, when one's been in the business nearly 4 decades, you say, oh, there's something else I've wanted to do, and you do it. That's how I got into the felting. But with the knitting, I'm using yarn and I create the shape of the pieces for the garment as I go on a knitting machine. It's a domestic knitting machine, and I have, I think, 4 set up in my studio, but I can only use 1 at a time. So yeah, I am creating the fabric as I go, but when it comes off the machine, I have a back or a front or a sleeves shaped with armholes, shaped with waist shaping with a hem, and ready to join with the other pieces.
Okay, so when you do those shapes, how does it compensate for sizes though? I mean, is that when you have to actually build the sizing into for your pieces?
I do that ahead of time. I have there's a wonderful woman named Susan Lazier, who's actually Canadian but living in California for many years. She's a fashion teacher, fashion professor, and she designed this software called Garment Designer, which I've used since the late 90s. And it's a software that I can use. It's for knitting, sewing, and weaving. I can use it to make a schematic, make my patterns. So, and it's got click and drag, so I can look at the schematic, the shape, and then because I've got it set to knitting, when I print it out, it prints out the needle numbers I need to have on my knitting machine and where I need to decrease, increase, according to what I've done in setting it up. I input the knitting gauge, so that I know I've got the right gauge for knitting. Anybody who knits who knows you have to have a gauge, so many rows, so many stitches to a square inch. And I put that in, I make my pattern, and I can do that. Once I've designed something new, I can scale it up or down and adjust it and customize it to a client if I'm doing a custom order, or I just scale it up and down for sizes if I need to do a large, a medium, or a small.
Yeah, well, that's so handy because a lot of your sweaters are actually fitted sweaters.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, the custom piece is vital, I guess, for all the amazing shapes that we have as humans, right?
Yes, and I've dealt with them all.
So with the felting part, like, can you explain what felting is? It's not like felt, like you're crafting felt. Like, what is felt? Like, you're making felt.
Well, felting is, you can only felt with natural fibers like alpaca or, well, primarily wool. And I use merino wool. There are different other wools depending if you're going to felt slippers or a bag or something. But because I do garments, I use merino wool because it's the softest. And you are working with roving, which is essentially the sheep is sheared, the fleece is combed and carded so that all the fibers lay in one direction. It's washed and cleaned and often dyed, because I buy my roving in colors, and then there's a way of laying it out. You sort of feather it out, you lay it out, cross hatch and so on. You do about 3 or 4 layers, and you wet it down with warm soapy water, and then there's a lot of rubbing. When I'm doing the design, I can put silk pieces of silk, other pieces of roving, pieces of ribbon, anything that, because wool has a lot of fibers, the wool itself has like tiny little fingers that will work their way through the silk weave or around the ribbon, and it works its way together. Once you have felted wool together, there is absolutely no way of getting it apart.
Wow.
So it's a marvelous medium. There was a tale of one of these shepherdesses out in the field. She's minding her sheep, and she's wearing leather sandals. This is maybe like 1,000 years ago, and her sandal is rubbing on her foot. So she picks some fleece off the hedge where it's come off the sheep. She tucks it into her sandal, and at the end of the day, when she pulls it out, it's a piece of felt, because with the rubbing of her foot and the moisture from the ground, it's created a piece of felt.
Amazing. So when you say rubbing, like how long does it take? How much do you have to rub it? I mean, I heard some people say, oh, you just throw it in the washing machine, but that doesn't.
That is if you're, there are two stages. There's the felting, where you get your wool and your materials to meld to each other. So if I put layers of wool and some silk, colored pieces of silk, and that sort of thing on top of each other, the felting is me rubbing, just surface rubbing on the pieces, on the pattern pieces, and getting these all to meld to each other to get the wool fibers to work their way through the silk and through each other. Then after that, there's the fulling, which is when you are, when you make a piece for a felt garment, it's a third again the size. It's big, because in the fulling process, you're going to be throwing and dropping it, and the shock to the fiber shrinks the piece down and firms it up. So when you're talking about somebody throwing something in the washing machine, and I used to do that actually with collars, you've got the heat and the agitation all at once, but with a knitted piece, you've already got the fibers joined together as a knit. So what you're looking for is all the fibers to meld and firm up and shrink. Okay,
very complicated. I mean, that, and all these different stages go into combine these different fabrics, and you've done amazing things with combining the felting with the silk, with the knitting, like, and learning. I mean, that must have been, I mean, that's difficult, you know, trying to get all those pieces to work together to make something that hangs nicely and is comfortable. And
that's true. Once it was a learning process. I always, for a long time, I knew I wanted to do it, and I actually got an Ontario Arts Council grant several years ago, and I was able to hire Andrea Graham, who's an amazing felter. She lives in Florida now, but she's Canadian, to give me a day to show me how to do it. So I learned from the best, and then I did another workshop. I still do workshops. I love doing workshops. I learned something new. I've taken a workshop from a felter from Australia and that sort of thing. But I got into felting, and I started actually with pre-felt. And what pre-felt is roving. That has been, how can I say, needle felting is when you go in and out of wool with a barbed needle, and it pushes the wool down and it pulls it up. So it essentially, it's tiny tangles. So you get this done, but it's like cotton batting, but it's merino wool and it's yardage. So I haven't done that in a while. I do the from the roving, but when I'm using the pre-felt, I order yards of off-white or white undyed pre-felt, and I dye it myself. I've got a big dye pot, so I'll dye pieces, and then I will cut the pieces out, and then I'll embellishment, and then I embellish them, and then I'm back to the rubbing and the felting part, and then the fulling, which is the shrinking and firming up part.
Wow, it's you're like you're building a workable art, like wearable art.
I love it. One of the things I like about felting over knitting is knitting, you're working with stitches and rows, and when I'm putting in colors or patterning, I'm going by the rows. The knitting machine knits rows and it builds on stitches. When I'm working with felt, I can put whatever I want wherever I want. I can put a piece of silk here, I can put something there, a piece of ribbon there. I can just put it wherever I want. So for me, it's more freeing than knitting. I love the knitting, and when I get in front of a knitting machine, it's just so much fun. But I love felting too.
Yeah, it's a very organic process. And then you're actually painting as well, and silk screening as well.
Well, I haven't got to the silk screening yet. I have to. That's a stage I'm working. But I've been. There's something also called Nuno felting, And what nunofelting is you start with silk chiffon, and then you lay wool roving over the silk chiffon, and then you do the same thing. You're doing the rubbing with the water and the soap and agitating, and so the wool works its way through the silk chiffon. I say chiffon because it's an open weave and the wool can work its way through. And you can do this with a whole garment. You need a lot of silk and you make your pieces. But what's fun about wool on silk is, especially if you're just doing something as simple as a scarf. You've got a scarf and the wool shrinks and the silk doesn't. So the wool gets smaller, creating ruffles where the silk is. And it's or bubbles, depending on how you put the roving. It's really rather fun.
Beautiful, yeah. And it makes the really flowing kind of costume and things. Yeah, well, speaking of costumes, I you've also been involved in costume design, and I saw that you did the costuming for Tommy the Who. And
I did 36 garments. That was back in the mid-90s when it came from New York to Toronto to the theater there. And I had a friend who was in costuming, and I just got a phone call saying, would you be the knitter? There's a lot of sweaters in this production, Tommy, would you be the knitter? So I spent time meeting with the designer from the New York production, and there were 36 sweaters, but one sweater was done 6 times because there were 2 actors portraying this character that coming on stage left, stage right. And it was an adventure in that I had to use the sizing that the theater costume wardrobe person gave me of each actor. So I'm fitting each actor, and once or twice, this was done over a period of about 2 months, and once or twice I would actually head down to I can't remember the name of the theater that was in Toronto, and go to the costume department and fit. And I'd get there and it didn't fit. So I ordered tons and tons of yarn because I didn't have time to pull it out and do it again. So I'd toss it to one side and start again. It was a lot of fun working with, I believe his name was David Woolard from New York, and sourcing the yarn that was needed for each garment, because somebody designs a show, they have the costumes already designed, and this show started in La Jolla, went to New York. I believe it got some Tony Awards, and so the costume I did, my part that I did for the Toronto production had to exactly look like the New York production, the La Jolla production. So we had to source the right color of yarn. I remember looking for an orange. I went to every yarn store in Toronto, and there was one place where I found the yarn I wanted. I found one ball. And I took it to David and he said, that's what I want. So I phoned them. I said, are you sure you don't have any more? And they rummaged around in the basement. They found enough of that one color that I could do the entire garment for that particular character.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I went to see that production of Tommy the Who.
It was fun. It was great.
Yeah, I don't remember the sweaters, sorry, but I remember
well, then fine. If you don't remember the sweaters, then they fit in and they added to the overall look, because there were hats, shoes, there's all kinds of components to costume. And I know one of the things that I was told was, because it was set, I believe, in the 50s, I had to fit over what the female actors will be wearing, which would be pointed bras. Women were wearing pointed bras in the 50s, so I had to do bust darts in my sweaters. And then I had to, there was one sweater that had a yoke to it. You and I would normally just pull over our head. I had to do a space for a zipper and put in a zipper because it had to go over a wig and a microphone.
Right. Yeah, that's great stories for your career, for sure. I know that you've done lots of things too. Like, I mean, I watch you and marvel at your marketing ability, because you're one of the artists that, you just do it all. You have it all. You just do it right. You do it all. You do websites. You've got great shops. You're up for anything. You've got beautiful booths. You're great with. You've got the whole package. And so I know that that's not an easy thing to do. And how important do you think the marketing part of when you're as an artist is in your business? How has that helped your success?
Well, I'm very fortunate in that I'm a very social person and I love people. So that when I'm doing a craft show and I'm in my booth, I love to talk to people. I love to enact it. And I know there's a lot of artisans that do shows with their work, but they'd rather just be back in the studio and not talk to anybody. But I love to talk to people. And I learned a long time ago when I first started in the 80s, getting things printed. I don't know if you remember mailboxes, etc., but we used to write things in Letraset and take it down and get it printed and then stuff it into envelopes and lick stamps and mail things out. And just as things progressed, I sort of kept up and learned. I don't know, the first time my husband brought home a computer, I said, well, enjoy that, I'm not remotely interested. And then I got into it. A friend of mine who is a graphic designer, she sort of got me started, and I never looked back. And I thought, all the things you can do. I make my own hang tags, I make my own rack cards, and that kind of thing, and I design them. And that in itself also is a creative outlet.
Yeah, and that's how with the branding, it ties the whole presentation together, which you do so well. And I know that you also you're always helping other artists. You're very supportive in the arts community. That's I know you're a huge supporter of Artfest too, and you help us do all kinds of things and go beyond what most exhibitors can manage. So you like helping artists. So what kind of things do you help artists with? I know you've been busy doing that as well as everything you do.
As I say, I love people, but I've been around the block a long time. I mean, I started doing, I think my very first show was the Ottawa Christmas Craft Show, Christmas of 1982. And I had no clue what I had actually been working in an art gallery in Toronto. So I'd seen other artists with their work, and I had an idea of what to do. So, and back in those days, they would send you a whole bunch of brochures to mail out to any mailing list or to nail on telegraph poles. And I got into the one-of-a-kind show, and bit by bit, I learned that promotion is important. Letting people know that you're going to be doing something, where you're going to be doing, and letting people know that maybe you have a new style or something like that. It wasn't as easy back in those days, but now it is so easy with social media, and it's important. I've had people come up to me and say, oh, well, you have this, or you've done that, or whatever. They found out because I posted it on my Facebook page, or it's been on my website. And about 20 years ago, a guy walked into my studio and he said, would you like a website? He was from Queens. He was one of the techie group. And I said, yeah, I would like a website actually. And so he and I worked together. We worked for a while. He was great. And he actually said to me, one day you're going to be doing your own. But we worked together, and it was a design thing. He built the website. It was very simple. It was quite interesting. And I made buttons that he said, make some buttons and we'll do those as your menu. And we'll mouse over the buttons, and the buttons would change color when you moused over them. But things like, I'd say, okay, I don't want blue writing and as headings, I want black writing. So we worked on that. And I went to the Chicago One of a Kind show, and my website was, as I say, was very simple. And I thought, I want to tell people where I've been, what I just did. It was very exciting. So I started a blog. And then I wrote to this guy, I spoke to him, I said, can you link my blog to my website? So we did that. And so I started writing a blog. And recently, in recent years, I've been talking to techs, and they say, make sure you have a blog on your website. So if I write a blog post, recently I wrote one about sewing masks. I wrote a bit about staying home and what we're all doing as artists and creating and turning our talents to masks and that sort of thing. And I always post it to my Facebook page. Yeah. So if I see somebody who wants to do something, wants to, move on, I'll kick them in the butt and say, get on your Facebook page, or, make sure you're going to post this here. And I've actually did a couple of workshops in Kingston about MailChimp, which is a way you can mail out to a mailing list. We're no longer stuffing envelopes and licking stamps. Mail out to a mailing list. It's an email list, but it also it follows the CASL laws, the Canadian anti-spam laws, and it's a great way to send out, rather than, because we used to send them out from our email list on our computers, and it would end up in somebody's spam, or it would get lost. So all these little things that I may just have stumbled upon and somebody else hasn't, so I'll share it because I've been around the block and I might as well impart. And sometimes I get paid for doing it. A lot of times I get paid for doing this.
Yeah.
For teaching just little workshops on how to keep going.
Yeah. Well, you're a great asset to the Kingston community and to the artist community, that's for sure. And I know when you mentioned the buttons, I know I didn't mention this, but you actually even make your own buttons. I mean, I
do.
Yeah, which I love. So what are the buttons made out of?
Polymer clay.
So can you explain to us what
polymer clay is? Essentially plastic when it's baked. There was another designer, Nora, is it Nora? I can't remember her name. And I knew her from the One of a Kind for years, and she had her son making buttons. She had great big chunky hand knits. But somebody once said, do you have trouble getting buttons? Because I moved from Toronto to Kingston and I couldn't just pop downtown and pick out buttons. And I said, yeah, I have to go to Toronto. I get the buttons I think I need. I come back and I think, damn it, I've forgotten yellow ones. So she said, make your own. So she showed me how to work with polymer clay. So I can make any buttons that I want. And they pick up the design in the garment. So very often, if I've got a new design, I'll do the sweater, and then I'll think about, what kind of buttons am I going to put on this? And then because I started doing knitted wraps, and you put a wrap on and it slides off your shoulder, I started doing pins. So I do pins to hold the wraps together, and there we go.
Yeah, and they become another piece of art on the actual garment. I love that because the buttons are actually little miniature sculptures with beautiful colors, patterns.
Thank you. Well, they make it special and they make it unique. And as artists, we're always thinking of something. What do they call it? Something that makes our own work unique. Because I know, having done shows for many years, I've encountered artists who have said, I've taught a class, this person was in my class, and now she's making work that looks like mine. So then there's nothing you can do about that. You just have to move on yourself and move forward and create something new so that the person that seems to be copying you is left in the dust, or eventually goes their own way and finds their own style.
Yeah, that is a conundrum sometimes for artists who teach workshops. But everybody does eventually find their own way and change and evolve. I've watched that happen over the years for sure. But that's a good point. Yeah. So what's the other thing I was going to ask you about? When people buying your work, I mean, what's so nice about what you do is that when you buy a piece, it's timeless. Like, it doesn't go out of style. Like, it's because it's a piece of art and it's unique, and it's, I have a few pieces like that too myself. I bought from artists over the years.
Yeah. And
you can wear it anywhere, anytime. It always is, relevant. So you must have a lot of collectors, and people must have pieces of, over the years that they've had for a long time.
Well, I was at the One of a Kind show a few years ago when I was still doing it, and a lady was talking to me, and she had her coat on and she had a really nice sweater underneath, and I said, oh, that's really nice. Can I see it? She took it off. It was one of mine. and it was a pullover, and I'd already moved into making cut. I had to learn how to make button bands and buttonholes, but I started off making pullovers. I started with hand knits, and I used to bicycle around Toronto with bags of yarn to a handful of knitters that I had, and then I'd bicycle around, pick up the pieces, and then sit in my tiny apartment and sew them together, and then I moved to the knitting machine. So I was doing pullovers, which is essentially front and a back and 2 sleeves. And this lady had one of my pullovers with a nice collar on it, and I didn't recognize it. But I grew up in England in the 50s, and even though I was the eldest child, I got hand-me-downs from kids up the street. So you grow up learning to value what you have and make it last. And so I try to do that with my work, because if somebody's going to pay, $400 or $500 for one of my sweaters, I want them to be able to wear that for a long time. So it needs to keep its style and its look for a long time. I use the best materials that I can so that it wears well and keeps its look for the long time. And I always advise people, to hand wash or, get it carefully cleaned if you want, because you pay a lot of money for something. You want to have that for a bunch of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing that's so nice about having those handcrafted, beautiful pieces of clothing made by Carolyn Barnett.
Thanks, Lori.
Chat with you and show your work and meet you in person for our audience to see you. And lots of people are going to be watching from Kingston and from all over now. We're going online. We're going to be taking Artfest Kingston to the world. So.
And I'm going to promo it. It's going to be on my social media.
Yes, that's so great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will be talking to you soon, and hopefully see you at a show soon in person. But
let's hope. Let's hope. We miss getting together as artists. But thank you very much, Lori.
And we can buy your beautiful things on our